All right, so today we're going to go over compression on tracks and in the mix bus or in the mastering section of the Tascam DP-008EX. So to start off with, if you were recording tracks, chances are you're probably going to put some kind of effects on it, EQ, whatever. And the way to do that would be to go into the input setting, EQ dynamics button, and press that, and then you're going to wind up with these options. So you've got both the channels. Obviously you can switch between A and B and apply any of these things, EQ and dynamics, to either or both channels. So since we're concentrating on the dynamic portion today, compression, you're going to have on, off, and so you just jog wheel it on, and then you can look at your parameters. Okay, so they have presets, but we can go into the parameters and actually set the threshold, ratio, level, attack, and release, and those are the options that you get on the Tascam for compression. So before we go any further, I had a guy the other day, I was mastering some tracks, mixing and mastering some tracks, and we were talking about compression, and he didn't really have a very clear understanding. He knew what it was, and he knew how it worked, and he wanted to know a little bit more about it. So this is what I told him. All right, so here's my compression 101 explanation for how I kind of show it to my friend. All right, so we got a bandwidth here. This is what you can't hear. You know, negative infinity dBs. This is peaking, overload, clipping, all right? And you're recording a track, and it's going up towards where you want it, but it's kind of staying there, and it's a little thick, and it's going to interfere with your other tracks and kind of take over the whole mix. That's just an example of where you would use compression. That's not always what you're doing. Okay, so the compressor is like a little computer. It basically is going to do your bidding. And so your bidding is, I'm going to set a threshold for this thing. And if it goes over that threshold, I want you to act on it. So this is your threshold, T. All right? And the compressor is going to corral this sound if it goes beyond that threshold. Now, it needs some parameters. So the parameters you give it are, first of all, you'll say, okay, well, if it goes X amount of dBs over this threshold, bring it down, say, for instance, 1 decibel under the threshold. So that's a 6-to-1 ratio. So here's a sound, and bang, there's what they call the transient. That's the top. It has gone over the threshold, and this is a 6 here. And it's gone 6 dBs over the threshold. So now the compressor would, at this setting, with no other things considered, instantaneously bring this down 1 dB under the threshold. But if you did that, if you just instantly did it, then it would be like one of these sets of headphones that's on like an aircraft carrier at a firing range or something, where when a loud sound goes off, it hard limits it to where as soon as that sound goes off and that microphone, which is going to hear it before your ear is, hears it, it shuts it down instantly. So it sounds like a firecracker 6 blocks away. You don't really hear anything. Well, you don't want to do that to the sound, because then, you know, you'd kill all the dynamics of it, and it would just be way down in the mix, and then everything under it, all this stuff, would be even lower, and that you don't want, not right away. So what you do is you say, well, wait a second. When it makes that really loud sound, give it a few milliseconds or whatever you want to pick. That's the attack. That's when the compressor attacks this transient, this sound. And it's a period of time. So it lets that through a little bit so you can hear it, and then dumps it down. Now, the converse is true. If you then immediately let it come back up, so all it did was bring it straight down and back up again, you wouldn't even notice that it went down. It would be the same thing. You wouldn't even notice that it attenuated it, because it's already back up already, and it's split millisecond, you know. So you give it a release time, okay? So now you've the transients come up, it waited a little bit, brought it down, then it's going to leave it down for a little bit and let it come back up again. And so as this proceeds, you wind up getting, instead of this big gigantic mayonnaise sandwich of crap, you get a more tasty sandwich of a dynamic sound that's more interesting and isn't blowing over everything the whole way through the track without turning it all the way down. So now that you have that, you have your last part here, which would be your makeup gain. And this is where a lot of people think that, oh, a compressor brings up low sounds. It doesn't do that. All it does is limit sounds. But what it winds up doing is taking a waveform like this and turning it into one like this. So now you can turn the whole thing up. Because if you just turn the whole thing up here, these peaks will be blowing through the ceiling. But now you can bring this thing up. They won't be blowing through the ceiling, and you'll still get to hear the little stuff that's in between. The little, like, for instance, let's give this a practical application and say this is a snare drum. So the dude's going ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, you know, and doing different techniques with his sticks and stuff, and the snare's rattling, and he's doing little ghost notes, but accented, punctuated sounds. You catch those punctuated sounds for just a little bit, so it gives it the dynamic, interesting sound that makes it exciting. And then you also can bring up all the little other interesting stuff that's in between without it being very loud at all, but it's still in the mix. Otherwise, again, if you just took this whole thing and turned it down, you wouldn't hear any of that. It would be buried. So you've effectively turned this into this, and then are able to bring it up to a level where you can hear it all, and even get some of those real punchy sounds and still hear all the interesting stuff in between. And that is my breakdown of very basic idea of what you can do with compression. Obviously, there's a lot of other things you can do, but that's the basic idea, so you can kind of get an understanding of what you're accomplishing with a compressor.